Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here. So thank you for joining us at the inaugural Goodwill Workforce Development Leadership Forum, where we're working on strengthening Chicago's economic and employment outlook through the power of work. I'm Clayton Pryor. I serve as Chief Mission Officer for Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Chicago. As a proud Chicagoan, I know firsthand the commitment and passion it takes to create equitable opportunities for the people that we serve. Today, Goodwill brings you together to explore how we can collectively shape the future of Chicago. As I look around the room, I see more than just individuals. I see a community and a testament to the power of unity. I know the dedication to supporting our local workforce and advancing racial equity and creating more equitable opportunities for Chicagoans is what brought you here this morning. Our speakers and our fellow Goodwill leaders look forward to collaboratively tackling this topic today around the economic outlook and the employment outlook. I'd like to take just a few moments to recognize a few of Goodwill's board members who are in the room. We have Jim Boris, President and CEO of Zilber Limited. Thank you for being here. Let's give him a round of applause. And Brad Kalsher, partner at Michael, Best, and Fredrich. Let's give him a round of applause as well. Over the past year, we've faced ongoing labor market challenges. However, workforce development services like our Talent Bridge staffing agency has leveraged years of experience to create workforce solutions. We have supported job seekers and employers and forged strategic partnerships and programs, ultimately helping thousands of people find work in the communities that we serve. In 2022, we served over 43,000 individuals in 23 counties across our 2-state territory. I think that deserves a round of applause as well. 2,200 of them right here in Cook County. People are really at the heart of what we do. Our work is rooted in creating equitable opportunities through our workplace and across the diverse communities that we serve, both in Illinois and Wisconsin. As we formally convene around a key set of topics today, I'd like to begin with a short video to show you our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Immediately following the video, the next voice you will hear is our President and CEO, Jackie Hallberg.
Winning is doing what is right, and doing what is right is winning.
When you connect with Goodwill's mission services, with Clayton Pryor and team here in Chicago, for your own workforce needs, you are creating opportunities for individuals and families to experience the dignity of work and to see a better path forward.
What unites us here is that our personal values, what we care about, aligns with what this education is all about, that we are educating men and women for and with others.
Or diversity work is something that's never accomplished. It's something that's ongoing. And we all have to understand that and work towards it.
For all of us in the room who look like me, I think that's where the question of being an ally comes in. If you're okay with people being discriminated against, that's your decision, and you're gonna have to live with that, and you're gonna have to live your life. If you're not okay with it, what is being asked of you?
You know, I always ask the question, what is mine to do? Like, what is ours to do? Because sometimes, you know, we may feel defeated and say, well, this will never change. And I don't know if I could get out of bed every day if I didn't think things could change, whether it's changing the world or changing the culture. But sometimes it feels so big that we absolve ourselves of any responsibility.
It's the power of people, the power of individual to create change. And I think that was the important takeaway. And I hope people walked away with that we all have a role to play within this work of change.
The question we have to ask ourselves, when do we step up? Every single person in this room. And the people you associate yourself with every single day. If we're not willing to make change, change is not going to happen.
Welcome and thank you for spending time with us this morning as we discover how we can, in the Chicagoland area, collectively work together to transform lives and communities through the power of work. You know, the video you just saw is just one of many different activities that Goodwill does to bring community members together to ignite conversation around making change and having impact. And the Loyola Project and the work that we did that day was so inspirational in terms of making connections and committing to change at the local level. So Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Chicago, your Goodwill, we are the largest of 155 Goodwills across North America. Well, most of you know Goodwill for our store and donation centers. Many are not aware of Goodwill's purpose, why we exist, our mission of connecting people to work, preparing people for life. So while Goodwill, we know, is a well-recognized brand for secondhand thrift, and we're good for the planet, keeping millions of pounds of textiles and household items out of local landfills, our mission is about people. It's rooted in people. At Goodwill, it's a promise, a commitment to create opportunities, ignite dreams, foster success for everyone in our community. We accomplish our mission by providing meaningful and equitable work, training, and career advancement opportunities. Our Goodwill employs over 5,200 individuals. We call them our first community, and more than half of our employees live and work here in Illinois. So please know that when you donate or shop at Goodwill, you heard it there, I always say it, when you donate or shop at Goodwill, and when you engage with our mission team for your own workforce needs, you're making it possible for so many to experience that dignity of work and an opportunity for a better future. So Clayton mentioned people are the heart of what we do, and I'll add on to that, we are just people serving people. And so as we gather together today, we are driven by the belief that every individual, regardless of background, circumstance, deserves the opportunity to thrive. So in the Chicagoland area, we're doing a piece of that. We're trying to drive impact and have change. Through our Goodwill workforce development, our youth engagement, and our community service programs, we're paving a path of progress that touches the lives of many. And as we look 10 years out, as a part of our 10-year vision, we have a strategic focus on growing Goodwill's mission in the city of Chicago, along with many of you, and hopefully in partnership with you. So a key to our success is really working one individual at a time, supporting them so they can gain the skills and the confidence through services like what we offer in Inglewood at our Workforce Connection Center. I think we opened back in 2010. So Ronnie is an individual who has received employment services at the Workforce Connection Center in Inglewood, and he was really focused on determining to make better decisions, set goals for himself after re-entering society after a time in incarceration. So Ronnie was referred to the Inglewood Workforce Connection Center. He enrolled in our professional skills training program. And following that program, you know, Ronnie left invigorated. He had a different view of the possibilities for his life. And through the help of Goodwill, Ronnie secured full-time employment and has done what he needs to do to obtain his driver's license. And there are so many more individual stories. So today, we hope to explore how our collective efforts can continue to remove barriers and open doors for individuals just like Ronnie, creating that ripple effect throughout the Chicagoland area. So in closing, I invite all of us to embrace the spirit of collaboration as we make that collective effort to embrace every individual, to give them the opportunity to unleash their full potential. So thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Your presence today really is a testament to your commitment in this work, this very important work. There is so much need in the communities that we serve. There is so much opportunity, and no one organization, no one discipline can do it alone. So please, we want to be a part of that, and let's do it together. So again, thank you so much for spending your morning with us.
Thank you so much, Jackie, our fearless leader. So moving right along, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. So David Opedal is a policy advisor in economic research department at the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago. David conducts research on the agricultural sector in the rural development, as well as analyzes business conditions and the economic regional economy. There's a lot more that I could read here about David, but I'm going to let him come up and talk to us about our economic outlook in our region. So let's give David a hand.
Thanks, Clayton. It's great to be here. I just looked over there. You can't quite see our building, but we're just between here and the Board of Trade, so it's not a long commute, but it's great to get out and meet people that I normally don't get to mingle with, so appreciate the opportunity to Goodwill invited me. And it's great to have a chance to share a little bit about what's been happening with the economy, and in particular, we had a big meeting. Some of you might have heard about the Federal Open Market Committee met this last week and came out with some new numbers, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But that comes every 6 to 8 weeks that our president, along with the Board of Governors and all the other presidents, meet in DC and try to come up with plans for where the economy needs to go. And right now, it's looking pretty good in terms of the near-term outlook, and we're still concerned about inflation because that is one of our big jobs, job number one, you might say. We have a goal of having 2% inflation for the economy, according to the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, and so that's one that we haven't been meeting lately, but thankfully unemployment is still very low. So on the employment side of our mission, we have two tasks from Congress to have maximum employment subject to stable prices. So we're working on price stability. It's moving in the right direction, so that's positive news as well. But I just wanted to summarize a little bit what's been happening in the last few years, because as all of us know, it's been a very tumultuous time, lots of different things happening that we've never experienced before in our lifetimes, like a COVID pandemic that thankfully is now in the rearview mirror for most purposes, although some people are still getting COVID, but thankfully it isn't as serious, as the disease progressed. And so that was a huge shock to the economy, of course. We had such a quick downturn, and obviously Goodwill felt the impact of that. I was talking with somebody, and your stores were all closed. That happened, but then we bounced back pretty quickly, didn't we? People started to get back to work, whether it was remotely or in person for those that needed to be there, but certainly a challenging time, and that was really tough for the economy because it was a recession. But then we came roaring back because when everybody was staying home, they started to want to do jobs like fix up their house, maybe even clean out their closets. And so there were all these kinds of effects that happened from the pandemic that were very unique, and we're still kind of dealing with the aftermath of that in terms of kind of the inflationary pressures that built when supply chains were disrupted and people needed to get things, but they couldn't get them, and so there was lots of demand for many projects. But in addition to all that, then we had the Ukraine war that started, and that affected a lot of energy markets and agriculture markets. As you heard, I'm focused a lot on agriculture because our 5-state region, just to let you know, includes all of Iowa, most of Illinois and Indiana, and the southern parts of Wisconsin and Michigan. So, your whole footprint for Goodwill in this area is part of our district, so we're happy to have all that in our district. district, but certainly we have a lot of agriculture too. So that's been a big part of our focus, for my focus. But then we have had strong growth in the economy in the last 4 quarters. So it's been positive after a little downturn at the start of last year. And certainly there have been higher interest rates that are kind of starting to affect the economy and certainly are impacting a lot of decisions people are making. But let's step back and look a little bit at what's happened in terms of the economy. This is a number I like to use because it's kind of like the pulse of the economy. If you take a whole bunch of different statistics and number crunch them into one number, it's kind of like what's been happening, whether the economy's going above trend or below trend growth. And 0 is trend growth in this chart. So you can see that COVID, was huge, downward movement there. We had a big shock to the economy, but then we bounced back pretty quickly. And then it's hard to see what's been happening lately because everything's been kind of close to trend. So let's focus in on the last year here, and you can see that we've had some months when it's been slower and then some that have been popping up. So we've kind of had this roughly trend growth over the longer term in the last year, but a lot of volatility there. So we're still trying to follow that and figure out how that's going to impact. But the last number there for July was a positive one. And stepping back just a little bit, thinking about the region, what's in our region? Well, we have a very diverse region. It's more diverse than the nation overall. In terms of demographics, you can see here that there are more Black and Hispanic people in the Chicago metropolitan statistical area, we call it, which actually goes up into Wisconsin. So it includes Racine, I believe, as well as Kenosha, but then down around Chicago. And so you can see that being diverse is a benefit to the region, but we also have more education. So it's kind of an unusual thing that a lot of the United States has to worry about not having as many college graduates. Well, a lot of them want to come to Chicago, so that's been a positive thing for the region as well. And then finally, on the right, you can see the age distribution. So in terms of poverty rate, the Chicago metropolitan area has lower poverty than the nation. And at the same time, more foreign-born people are living here. So that's part of the dynamics of this economy, that we have a lot of people that bring their talent from other countries. And so that's been a benefit for the U.S. and for Chicago as well. So when you look at the unemployment rate, you can see how the big COVID shock boosted unemployment dramatically for the U.S. and for the region. But then things have returned to relatively low unemployment, under 4% for the last year here, and for the region as well, but slightly above what the U.S. is for the region. So that's part of the story here, that our region is maybe not quite as strong in the economy as the nation as a whole. And you can see that as well here in terms of employment growth. So, unemployment is those that don't have jobs as a share of the labor force. Employment growth just shows how many new jobs are being created. And you can see here that, there was a huge bounce back in jobs after COVID, but and so we've made up those jobs. So we're finally above the level we were at prior to COVID, and all those lost jobs have been replaced with new jobs. But the growth within this region has been slower, and so it took longer for the region to get back to that level of employment pre-COVID than the nation did. So then, with that as the background, we can think a little bit about what's been happening for the nation and how the Fed sees the economy based on this last meeting. So every other meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, they come out with the projections for where the economy is headed in the next few years. And here you can see that in terms of the gross domestic product in real terms, accounting for inflation, that we had a downward number for 2020, then it was shot way up for 2021, so we had above trend growth, and then we had slower growth last year. But this year, again, we're going to be up a little bit from last year. So The expectation, is that we're having a strong end of the year, that some of the recessionary pressures that were thought to be there have been, skirted, that we haven't ended up having a recession this year. There, a lot of forecasters were thinking we were bound to have one, but it doesn't look like it's in the cards right now. Maybe next year, but hopefully not. Hopefully we'll have what we call a soft landing, where the Federal Reserve has negotiated kind of an increase in interest rates that will slow the economy enough that inflation will come down, but we won't end up having a recession. So that's what this forecast shows. You can see that the growth would continue to be around just slightly under 2% for the next 3 years there, with a little downturn next year possibly. But the way to read this, I guess I should have mentioned, is the red line is kind of the median forecast of the participants at the Federal Open Market Committee, which are the 12 presidents of the banks, like my president, and then the 7 members of the Board of Governors. So that's what this data is coming from. So it looks like a soft landing is a potential outcome, more probable than it was earlier this year, with unemployment not increasing as much as it was originally thought maybe it would under that scenario. Here you can see it staying relatively close to 4%, just a little above. And so that's really pretty strong level of employment and unemployment. You can't have this all the time, and most recessions, like COVID recession, obviously it went way down, but then you don't see it as much in this number just because, the unemployment went way up. It boosted 1 year, but then it went back down to kind of the low levels very quickly. So it was an unusual recession, much different than the 2008 and 9 period. And then inflation, obviously, is a big concern because it did pop up the last couple of years, and the Fed might have been slower to recognize that than it should have, given the dynamics. It was difficult to figure it out just because of, the COVID recession was so fast moving. But then the Fed has moved quickly to try to move inflation down as interest rates rose. And you can see that the projection would be having inflation coming back down to the 2% level over the next few years, but still be a little bit elevated in the next next year. And so then that brings us to the kind of the crux of the whole economic outlook from a Fed perspective is, what are interest rates doing? And here you can see how back in 2021, at the end of the year, we expected this year's interest rates to be quite low. This is still 2021 there, but then 2023, moving up towards 2%, but still relatively low. But what do we actually have? Interest rates had to move up over 5% from the Fed funds target. So the expectation would be that maybe there'd be one more increase this year, but there was a pause in this last meeting. So we haven't had that yet, but there could be one more quarter point increase according to this projection yet this year. But then in the next few years, start to have interest rates coming down because inflation was moving down towards our target. And as long as the data continues to show that inflation is moving down properly, it'll start to be a period where interest rates would fall in terms of our Fed funds focus, and then you would anticipate others in the economy would follow in along with that. So that's a quick and a brief look at what's been happening in the economy. And it'd be great to know more about what you're seeing. If any of you want to participate in our survey that we do monthly about the economy and what you are seeing in your area, in your community, feel free to sign up for this survey. So I'd really appreciate if anybody has any questions to reach out to me, but obviously we are on short time here, so it'll turn it back over to Clayton.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you, David, for those insights. Next, I'm going to invite Suzanne Maldonado, who's our Vice President of Talent Bridge and Business Development, who's going to moderate our panel. So let's give Suzanne a round of applause as she comes forward.
So I think as we get things started a little bit, before we jump into questions and what I know is going to be a really engaging discussion this morning, I'd love to have the panelists just do a little introduction themselves in their own words about themselves and the organizations that they're joining us from. So Lisa, I'll turn it over to you to start things off.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I am Lisa Blythe-Jones, CEO from Chicago Jobs Council. And the Chicago Jobs Council is a workforce development intermediary organization that keeps job seekers at the center of everything we do. And we do our work in 3 ways. We advocate for job seekers by researching the most pressing matters in the workforce development field and developing recommendations and sharing those out broadly. And then in addition to that, we build capacity for the field, and we do that through our trainings, our learning cohorts, and our leadership academies. And then we actually influence policy, and we do that on a local, state, and federal level. And we do that to actually increase workforce funding for the public workforce system, create equitable pathways, and then also to make sure that we are removing barriers for people so that they can be successful in employment. And then the last part I will talk about is our anti-racist framework that we have been focused on since the pandemic in terms of just thinking about how we can be more race conscious in our practice and policies for the field. Excited to be here, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Marissa Lewis. I am the Interim Director of Development with the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. As Suzanne mentioned, yes, we operate the largest public workforce development system in the country. And this consists of a couple different sort of buckets of work. One of the biggest ones is the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding. So we are the recipients of that funding through the state of Illinois, and we operate workforce services, and we deliver training solutions to eligible adults and youth in Chicago and Cook County. And we do that through a network of partner agencies. So there are 10 larger American job centers in Chicago and Cook County, 5 in the county and 5 in the city, where our services, along with other important services, are all kind of housed under one roof. So essentially, they're called one-stops, one-stop shop for job seekers to access all of the services that they need. And then we also work with dozens of community-based organizations throughout the city and the county, many of whom are members of Lisa's network, and everything that she mentioned really supports kind of what we do. So our organizations work together very closely. So separate from that, the WIOA work, we also get funding from other government sources and philanthropic sources to run programs that are complementary of the WIOA work, but sometimes are focused a little bit more closely on a specific population in need or a specific industry and the employer needs in that industry. So we can have a full suite of programs that we operate. I'm pleased to be here today and looking forward to this panel. Here you go.
Thank you. My name is Ross Mayfield. I'm an investment strategy analyst at Baird, which is a full-service wealth management firm based in Milwaukee. I'm actually from Louisville, Kentucky, so a bit of an interloper here today, but thrilled to be here. My role is primarily thinking about how the macroeconomy and labor market and big themes and trends, like artificial intelligence, I think we'll talk about, things like that, how they interplay with financial markets. And a big part of what Baird does is manage wealth for foundations and institutions. But a big primary part of my job is writing research on themes that are, I think, present in a lot of the work that everyone else is doing today. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Rahill. I'm with the U Chicago Medicine Health System. So we are a academic, not-for-profit, integrated healthcare system here in Chicago. We are anchored in Southside Hyde Park, but our footprint is across Southland Chicago, as well as Northwest Indiana. I think a big 2 pillars of our identity is the research, the groundbreaking world-class care, but it's also our commitment to community care and access to care, knowing that employment is a huge social determinant of health. We have quite a large investment in developing partnerships in the community for employment pathways within our healthcare system. So here to kind of represent the work that we do in that space. And yeah, I will pass it back off to Suzanne.
Thank you, guys. So welcome to everyone. Actually, I'm going to hand this to you, Lisa, so we don't have mic interference. Welcome to everyone. I think as we start the discussion, I'd like to start kind of very big picture. We've emerged, as our keynote speaker was referring to, from some very disruptive years during the height of the COVID pandemic. And as a society, we've collectively moved into kind of a restore, recovery, and healing mode. So Lisa, maybe you can start us off on this one. Describe workforce development in 2023. What does it look like, and how is it different now?
I'm going to start with one word I'll say is holistic. So I think we're at a point now, and I think this is what occurred as we were in the pandemic, and even now as we think about it being in the rearview mirror. It is really about looking at the entire individual that sits before someone who is working to coach and empower that individual to move things along for their lives based on what they would like to co-design for their future. So I would say holistic, and I'm thinking about this from both sides of the equation. One, I'm thinking about it from the job seeker perspective, but I'm also thinking about it from the employer and ultimately the workplace perspective. So one, thinking about the holistic of an individual, but also on the other side, thinking about more flexibility in terms of workforce development now. So whether that is developing services, thinking about it being more focused around flexibility and integrating technology, which is another area that I think has changed. I think how we use it is not going away. And so we've had to change a lot of ways that we've developed workforce development programs in the past. And so now we think about that. And when I think about the people getting left behind, it's striking to me to actually have to still say we are dealing with the digital divide in 2023, but the fact is real. And so even as I hear about AI and I hear about the technology and even some of the entry-level positions, the technology is there. And so if it's a barrier for someone and they don't feel comfortable with it, that's an area that they may not feel comfortable moving into. So I think about that as well. And then also I'll mention the continued increase in supportive services for wraparound. So I think something we learned during the pandemic, and even with a lot of the federal programs that went on, anti-poverty programs that went on throughout COVID, we recognized that people might need more help than we originally knew. So if you're sitting down and better understanding the individual as a whole, you are better able to understand what they might truly need to be successful in the training and moving into employment. And then the biggest part on that is the work is not done then, because it is about the retention. So how do we retain the individual? And that work can be done in partnership with the workforce programs, but also with the employers. And then lastly, I'll say, I think about the quality jobs. So we know that most of the job growth is in some of those lower wage jobs. So that's the highest job growth. And then the next highest is in highest wage jobs. So then where does that leave job seekers? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. And I think we've talked about quality jobs as it relates to understanding what individuals actually need, whether that is thinking about benefits, thinking about schedules that people can rely on, extra pay, all of those things. But again, part of the retention strategy, right, that good employers want to have. So those are just some of the things. And then lastly, I'll also say being intentional about practices and policies. We know that the majority of people who access workforce development services are people of color. And so in thinking about the people that we are setting out to serve, it really is about being intentional about our practices, our policies, and understanding some of the unintended consequences that some of these practices and policies have caused. And that's the healing portion when we talk about the healing portion of this work at this stage. So that's what I'll add.
I think so many things there. Yeah, go ahead. Marissa, no, feel free to jump in.
I'll be quick. I just have a very specific example of something that Lisa mentioned, which is virtual shift. And so I think the question was about kind of workforce development in 2023 and how does this look different? And when I think of today versus before the pandemic, I mentioned the network of agencies that we provide workforce services through. Those were pretty much all physical interactions in before 2020. So you go down to your local workforce center, or you go to the organization down the street that provides you other sorts of social services, and you can access workforce development. And so in the pandemic, we were forced to shift very quickly and move to a virtual model. And that persists. And I think that does kind of make it accessible to a lot of people. Also, to Lisa's point, it makes it inaccessible to a lot of people as well. The digital divide is still an issue. But we're seeing the same thing with employers that seems to be sticking around, is that employers are more open to things like virtual interviews and kind of open hiring, online job fairs and things like that, which reduces some of the barriers to hiring for folks. So that's a couple of sort of positive things that we've seen in 2023.
I would echo, one of the, I think, advances that healthcare made in the workforce development space was entry into those low barrier jobs and creating pathways to jobs. But what I think is kind of on the rise and needs to be more heavily invested in is those longer term career paths that have higher education requirements, because those are going to allow people to really build those family sustaining wages. And it's wonderful to get someone in the door, but we have to kind of take it the next step and really help people think about their career trajectory. And that requires a longer term investment in programming, more financial funding from our partners, and these community organizations that support the wraparound services. That's critical to get individuals to stay within these programs, but it's a long commitment. A lot of these programs, especially for healthcare occupations, require at least a 2-year type of curriculum or program development. So that is where we'd love to see the future workforce development continue to grow in, is not just access to jobs, but access to careers that really provide a upward path.
So I want to just dig in a little bit on this point, because everyone who has spoken has mentioned it a little bit. So workforce development looks different in 2023. Who are you worried has gotten left behind or is getting left behind? And everyone who spoke sort of touched on this and what we need to do collectively to address this. But what is the thinking around what we can do for our most vulnerable populations, and who is getting left behind?
No pressure. So when I think about who's getting left behind, it's a wide range. Unfortunately, it's a wide range. So I think about those that may have the criminal backgrounds, and thinking about some of the jobs that are being created, and if that is a barrier to that actual occupation. And then I think about the English language learners, and thinking about, I really appreciate the point that you mentioned about it being a longer term investment in those pathways, because you're right, it's one thing to get someone in the door, but then it's something different to retain them and then for them to have growth opportunities with that employer. So I think about the English language learners, those that may have a criminal background. I think about families. It could be either parent in the family or the single parent, and the high cost of childcare. Something that I think about that perhaps we hadn't thought about before the pandemic is the fundamental way that we're thinking about work has changed for us as a society. And so even people in workforce development programs are thinking about their decision-making in terms of occupations they want to move into or not. And so I think part of that is part of who's going to get left behind is those people that don't have the education to move into some of those higher wage positions. And so I think about, the individuals who don't have a high school diploma, who don't have a high school equivalency. So I think about all of those individuals that might be have the skills suited for some of those entry-level positions, but then how does that really help them in the long term?
I'll go this time. We'll be equitable since I passed you the mic. I totally agree. So a metric we look at is something called the labor force participation rate, and it has been lower and lower in our country for a while. And it really measures the gap between the population and those working or actively seeking work. And why it's part of it is demographics, but a big part is those with a criminal background and those with substance abuse or opioid problems. And those are two major populations that are left behind by kind of the traditional model of hiring, in rigid or inflexible hiring practices, lack of support once they get a role. And those are the types of people where turnover is high if they can get into the workforce at all. And so it's populations where the work and investment needs to be very high on the front end, both from the job seeker side and the people supporting them, but also from the labor force side. And David mentioned the Federal Reserve's forecasts, or the FOMC's forecasts, and we, at least at a national level, have a very tight labor market right now. And I think one of the challenges and opportunities going forward for employers is to think more deeply about hiring from marginalized communities and be more intentional in their hiring practices to work with those with a criminal background or work with those that have had a substance abuse problem in the past, because those are in a lot of ways America's specific problems that have challenged our labor force.
And I just want to touch on something Lisa said too, because it's not necessarily a new challenge, but it's one that I don't think has been solved for yet. And it's the population that really are not educationally ready to step into these programs. A lot of our pathway programs to receive a certificate or an associate's level degree, you have to test into them, right? Because we're partnering with educational partners that have entrance exams and testing to get into these programs. And a lot of our participants that we're trying to target may not have been in the education system in several years, right? And maybe the last time they sat down and took a test was in high school, and that could have been 20 years ago. So that's another huge barrier where we see educational readiness as a prevention for individuals to get into these programs. So we've been trying to think about how to support the remedial aspect of education to enable that population to move into those more sophisticated career tracks or education tracks. So that would be one that I would say is still left behind, and one that really needs to be thought of more intentionally. Again, it's more of a commitment, right? Because you're starting kind of from the very beginning. But it's those individuals that really need the support for their families are usually individuals that have kind of more commitments at home. And then we also have to make sure that as we put people through programming, that they're also getting paid, right? Because there's a lot of individuals who cannot afford just to stop working and go back to school. And so that's a lot of where we see the benefit from our funding partners to be able to support salary while the individuals are going and receiving education.
Thank you. I think that's such a good point, Betsy. We think, we feel very strongly about that at Goodwill, that people can't afford to step out of their life to go through a training program. It just isn't feasible for so many people. So they're complex challenges for sure. Staying with our big picture, there's been considerable research and writing on the future of work and the impact that automation and artificial intelligence will have on employment, as well as generational shifts that we have happening right now, an aging workforce and younger generations' experience and preferences for work. So Ross, maybe you can start us off on this one. From your vantage point, what do you see as some of the greatest challenges facing employers and job seekers over the next decades?
Sure. So a couple pop to mind. One that I touched on earlier, I think for employers is it's a tight labor market, and they need to be thinking more creatively and more intentionally about not just where to hire from, again, those marginalized communities, but how to retain people. During the pandemic, the quits rate, the number of people leaving jobs, turning over jobs, spiked, and I think it measured not just different opportunities, but a lack of fulfillment from the work. And I think that in the end comes back to a lack of training, a lack of investment once they're hired. A lot of work goes into attracting talent. Then there has to be kind of the follow through on retaining and investing in that talent. You mentioned artificial intelligence, AI, automation. Those are big themes we think about. I think the uncertainty around those themes right now is a challenge on both sides, both to the employer and the job seeker. I would say there are certainly challenges, and the digital divide is one that you mentioned. But I would note a few things. I mean, one, if you want to think about it opportunistically, the sort of AI that we see in the world today has the potential to make the current jobs out there more productive and free people up for more meaningful work by automating away some of the less desirable tasks in a job. So a case study that I have read and loved was a call center. So just a large telecom company, and they introduced a kind of a small AI chatbot to assist their employees. Turnover goes down 25%, escalation rate goes down. So you have a win for the employer because you're turning over employees less. You have a win for the employees because the fulfillment is higher if you're escalating and getting in less conflict. So there's potential there. There's obviously a lot of concern about whether this sort of thing can take jobs or replace individual workers. And I would say, on one hand, the labor force is always changing. And so one place that workforce development can really step in is to help prepare people for the jobs of the future. The labor market is extremely tight. People are working, but the jobs today are completely different from the jobs of 30, 40, 50 years ago. So there's an opportunity to train and upskill and help with that digital divide. And hopefully companies will see that and invest as well. There's also the things that AI cannot do. And there's a real opportunity for people in those, whether it's softer skills and interpersonal relationship type of communication, or more physical labor. AI simply can't do that. So I think the uncertainty there is a challenge, but I think there's opportunity as well as the workplace changes.
Okay, because I just wanted to add a couple of things. So one, you reminded me about the multi-generational workforce. So when we think about people being left behind and we think about the technology, I also think about older workers. So that's one thing too. And then the other thing that came up as we talk about employers actually recruiting from populations that perhaps have not been in their workplace before, I think there's another opportunity for employers to become better prepared for dealing with a population perhaps that they hadn't had in their workforce before. And so they need to understand and think about what kinds of nuances may come with working with populations that they hadn't worked with before openly or set out to work with. So I did want to make a point of that.
So, sorry, Betsy, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing. Change is the biggest constant in healthcare, right? And I think one of the advantages of our industry is that we are somewhat recession-proof. I mean, during the height of COVID, we were at the height of hiring, for especially those clinical positions. So that's always a strong driver for it, but we have a labor shortage in healthcare. So when it comes to AI, one of the things that we look at AI for is to augment the capability of our workforce to reduce burnout. That is a huge concern for the labor workforce in healthcare, right? We are asking a lot of our healthcare professionals, regardless of what seat they're in, whether they're a clinical patient care provider or a non-clinical individual. I mean, they are in tough situations every day. dealing with people who are sometimes at their worst. And that can be a very emotional challenge for our labor. So we look at AI as how do we offload some of that stress and create more meaningful opportunities for our employees to connect with patients, because that's never going to go away. So we look at AI in a little bit of a different sense. You know, we do have a chat box for employees. We have implemented some advancements in that space, but it's in our world, I think it's less about replacing staff and more about giving staff opportunities to do their work in a different way, in a way that allows them to really do more of what you mentioned, Ross, what they really care to do.
Thank you. And so I just want to do a final kind of round of questions here around strategy. So research has shown that comprehensive workforce partnerships involving sectorial training, institutions of higher learning, nonprofits, and employers are key to connecting job seekers to good jobs in high industry sectors. You guys have all been touching on that. How do we scale up these partnerships in the Chicago region particularly? What commitments and investments are needed to make that happen? Betsy, you have the mic if you'd like to start us off.
Well, so in the healthcare space, we have developed a collaborative that actually Clayton was a huge part of, and many other people in this room are a part of, the Chicago Healthcare Workforce Collaborative. And that has enabled us to raise shared workforce challenges that aren't unique to a system or an employer, and it attracts larger funding for solving these challenges. That I think is critical in every industry, because it really does kind of lift up the voice of one to really make a larger call to action. Our educational providers, one thing that I know that they would probably say up here is they need more educators, right? In order to expand our workforce programming, we need more individuals that can support larger cohorts of programming, larger systems in place. I think what we've done to date is a lot in pilot form, and it's fantastic because we're creating frameworks, we're creating processes and models. But if we want to really grow and create larger impact and strategy, I think we need to think about how to have systemic change. And have some of these fundings not be, okay, we've got this funding for 18 months, what can we do with it, right? We need to have longer term strategies. And our community partners are very good at coming together and putting in support for those wraparound services, as you mentioned, of what's really needed to keep our participants engaged in these longer term programs. So those community partnerships are critical and really at the heart of what we do. And they're an extension of our teams, because we're a small team at U Chicago Medicine. We're very small. We could not do the work we do without the support of our community partners.
Thank you. Bringing it back to the Chicago metro area, we've been talking about all of the workforce challenges that we're facing. Marissa, what assets and strengths do we have to draw on to address these challenges?
What assets and strengths do we have on to address the workforce challenges in Chicago?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're right about the challenges. And I think we've all done a good job of at least talking about what some of those are today. One of the ones that we did not mention is just that the sort of federal funding for workforce development has been flat while the need has been rising. So there really is a need to supplement that with innovative programming. And I think one of the greatest assets that we have is the willingness of employers to participate in things like the sector roundtable that Betsy mentioned. There are some other really exciting ones that are going on in other industries, like in IT and in manufacturing and in transportation. Kind of all of those are falling under, in some part, they're supported by a relatively large grant that came into the area within the last year that is called the Good Jobs Challenge. And I think that this funding that came to our region is really indicative of an interesting culture shift at the federal level that it came from the Economic Development Administration. These are workforce dollars that allow a lot of flexibility, which is something you don't often hear when talking about government grants, allow a lot of flexibility, and the grant period included a whole year phase of just building up these sector partnerships. So essentially a planning phase before you have to train a single person. And so this has allowed these sector partnerships, some of which were thriving and in existence already, like the Chicagoland Healthcare Workforce Initiative, or collaborative, and some others that were kind of just getting started and needed to be formalized and needed a little support, and allowed them to build this infrastructure with employers, trainers, industry associations at the table, where employers are sharing their needs and training providers are there to customize training solutions. There are social service agencies there to provide the wraparound services that Lisa had mentioned is so important. So I think that is a really critical resource that is kind of recently kind of come to the front and is really growing, and I think it's going to represent an exciting future for workforce development locally and nationally.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for really a wonderful discussion and really thoughtful commentary on what we know are some complex issues. So thank you all for being here. And Clayton, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, let's give our panelists another round of applause. Thank you for your words in the conversation. So to close this out, I'm going to invite our Vice President of Mission Services, Ayom Siango, to give us a few words.
So for those of you that I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Ayom Siango, and as Clayton mentioned, Vice President of Mission Services with Goodwill. It has been a pleasure to have the opportunity to come together for such an important topic today. Looking across the room, we represent a collective commitment and dedication to the region and the employees and people that power it forward. Individually, we drive impact, but as a collective, we are united by a common purpose to empower our communities and elevate the lives of our neighbors in the Chicagoland area. There are a couple of key points I really wanted to point to again. Just a quick rundown. We heard, the state of our current work is holistic, right? And there's an equal role of employers, community stakeholders, job seekers, or dare I say, career seekers. I think we touched on this notion of tech as a barrier. Was really excited to hear about the continued challenges of AI, but we also walk into this moment with continued lack of access, right, to technology. There's a focus on equity that I think I heard today, but people are still being left behind. So as much as we lean in to parity, as much as we lean into normalizing the experience for people that are using our systems, there's some work to do. But clearly, the folks in this room are committed to resolving those gaps, dare I say. Love the notion of the call to hire from marginalized communities. What I also heard in that was not hire marginalized people, right, but invest, right? Because we all come with our talents, and I'm gonna borrow from a good friend of mine who says, talent is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere, and I think we touched upon that today. Lastly, we also touched upon this notion of the power of partnership, right? Which I think we were alluding to or directly speaking to in many different ways. We clearly cannot do this by ourselves, but we'll do this again as partners. Throughout this forum, we have delved into the heart of the workforce development movement, community engagement, and the transformational power of partnerships. We have heard from experts and shared insights to address the pressing challenges of employment in our region. I'm gonna quote somebody here. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. That's Margaret Mead. Today, Margaret Mead might confirm that we are that group. We are the architects of change, the advocates for progress, and the champions of inclusivity. Our discussions have highlighted not just the issues we face, but also the remarkable solutions within our grasp. This is just scratching the surface for the many ways our mission reaches people in our communities. If we choose, our journey either begins or continues today. It's our collective responsibility to nurture these ideas and grow them into impact that benefits our entire community. As we saw with one of the maps here, there are a lot of people in this region that are looking to us, not just in Chicagoland, but up to Milwaukee and past, and we are here to respond to that call. As we leave here today, I'd like to challenge each one of us to carry the spirit of this forum with us. Let's continue to be catalysts of change together If you are leaving with interest in collaboration, interest in reducing barriers, Goodwill is ready to partner. If you're an employer, a CBO, community stakeholder, that's why we're here. We're extending the offer or wanting to respond to your offer for partnership. Let's keep the dialogue alive, the partnerships thriving, and the dreams of Chicagoland burning brightly. So on behalf of everybody here, I want to say thank you. Clayton, anything, like last words? All right, so Clayton gave the, nope, we're good. So let's shake a hand, let's exchange some cards. Appreciate your partnership, appreciate your time, and thank you for being here.